A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. You're welcome to The World Today. Here are the headlines this hour. Lawmakers in South Korea begin impeachment process for President Yoon Suk-yeol after he announced martial law on Tuesday. There's trouble brewing for Macron's presidency in France as Prime Minister Michel Barnier faces a no-confidence vote. Plus, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says allies must provide enough support to Ukraine, a change trajectory in the war. So let's begin The World Today. Hello everyone, I'm Amarachi Ubani. We begin in South Korea today, where President Yoon Suk-yeol is facing impeachment by lawmakers upset by announcement of martial law on Tuesday. Opposition politicians have begun the proceedings to have him impeached, while Parliament will vote on the impeachment later this week. President Yoon imposed martial law for a few hours and almost immediately faced backlash and calls for its reversal, which he finally relented and did in the early hours of today. Already, the Defense Minister Kim Yoon-hyun, said to be influential in the president's martial law plan, has offered his resignation. Leader of the Democratic Party of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, said President Yoon posed a high risk of provoking North Korea into military conflict and has a significant chance to declare martial law again. Also happening today, 6 opposition political parties submitted a bill calling for the president's impeachment. Piggyback off the report about the president calling off martial law in South Korea, President Yoon Suk-yeol said earlier today he would indeed lift the martial law he had imposed just hours before the backlash, honoring a parliamentary vote against the measure. Yoon had declared martial law on Tuesday to thwart what he called anti-state forces among his opponents. However, the outraged lawmakers rejected the decree as protesters gathered outside Parliament. The law was unanimously voted down by 190 lawmakers in Parliament. Yoon's own party urged him to lift the decree. Under South Korean law, the president must immediately lift martial law if Parliament demands it by a majority vote. Well, as part of uproar against this martial law, people attended a candlelight vigil Tuesday night, condemning President Yoon Suk-yeol's surprise declaration. They were gathered at a building with Seoul Finance Center sign written in the background. Many cheered while they listened to speeches from speakers using a microphone. After having gathered for hours, they eventually dispersed. But those protesters eventually began to march down in downtown Seoul against President Yoon's decision. Many brought placards and held candles while listening to speeches marched along with banners, and they also chanted songs and slogans. The surprise declaration of martial law in the major U.S. ally late on Tuesday caused a standoff with Parliament, which rejected Yoon's attempt to ban political activity and censor the media as armed troops forced their way into the National Assembly building in Seoul. The main opposition Democratic Party called for President Yoon, who's been in office since 2022, to resign or face impeachment. South Korea's largest union coalition, the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, has vowed to strike until Yoon resigns. There's been no reaction yet from North Korea to the drama in the South. Well, this was a scene outside of the Parliament building on Tuesday. Parliament members scuffling with martial law troops. This is, of course, after President Yoon made that declaration. This footage was filmed by South Korea's broadcaster JTBC. It shows Parliament officials scuffling with soldiers trying to enter the building, and a fire extinguisher being sprayed on them eventually. There it is. What was happening inside the Parliament building? This was it. Furniture being used to barricade the doors to prevent those lawmakers from coming in. There's even damage to floors in some parts of the Parliament building. People were also seen sitting on the floor at some point. Fire extinguishers were also being used to barricade the doors and entrances to the building. Let's take the reactions now while we await reactions from South Korea's closest neighbor, North Korea. Neighboring Japan has expressed its concern about what's going on in South Korea. Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru told reporters earlier today that he's closely monitoring the situation in South Korea. And as of now, the Japanese government has not heard of Japanese nationals injured in scuffles with security operatives. President Yoon has been unpopular in South Korea, with his support ratings hovering around 20% for months. His People Power Party suffered a landslide defeat at a parliamentary election in April this year, ceding control of the unicameral assembly to opposition parties that captured nearly two-thirds of the seats. Russia has also commented following the events in South Korea on Tuesday. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said Russia is closely following those events, and Moscow deepened ties with Seoul's neighbor North Korea since the start of its war in Ukraine, drawing concern from Western countries. Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did sign a treaty in Pyongyang in June, which included a mutual defense clause. The United States, South Korea, and Ukraine have accused North Korea of sending more than 10,000 troops to Russia's Kursk region, where Russian forces are trying to expel Ukrainian soldiers. Maria Zakharova, referring to the incident in South Korea, said the situation on the Korean peninsula is already complicated by the provocative actions of the United States of America and its allies. Analysts have been reacting as well. Korea Foundation Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at the George Washington University and Director, GW Institute for Korean Studies, Celeste Arrington, says a surprise declaration by martial law by the South Korean president was an extreme move, most likely motivated by his frustration at political gridlock. She also says President Yoon is an inexperienced politician who has been at loggerheads with the opposition-controlled parliament.
It was pretty shocking and seemed to be a sort of somewhat extreme move. I think he is an inexperienced politician. He never held political office before and has shown signs over the last months of being increasingly frustrated with the political logjam that he faces domestically. So probably some level of frustration, I guess. In the Constitution, you can only declare martial law if in extreme cases of national emergency or, like wartime or an incident or military need. And so this clearly is not a context that fits those criteria. He, throughout his term since May 2022, has faced a National Assembly controlled by the opposition party, and both his party and the opposition party show very little tolerance for the other side. And so he, for example, has used many more presidential vetoes than ever before in South Korean history. The National Assembly, meanwhile, has tried to impeach dozens of members of his government. There's a long, decades-long history of calling the opposition pro-North Korean. North Korea has also sent spies into South Korea, has tried to infiltrate domestic South Korean politics over the years as well. To the extent that they have anything going on now, I have not seen any evidence that this justification for martial law now in 2024 is valid.
Let's bring in now former Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi, to join us now. Ambassador Keshi is in Abuja. Ambassador Keshi, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have been following this closely. We talked just before the interview, your thoughts about this. Where do you think the President Yoon got the inspiration, though, to declare martial law in South Korea?
I think it's very difficult to know where he got the inspiration from. But it shows you how leaders really be out of tune with some realities of the country. He should have known very well that for a nation that has gone through dictatorship and that fought and rejected dictatorship, military dictatorship a couple of years ago, and that it was reckless on his part, no matter the challenges he was having with the state National Assembly, to have imposed martial law at midnight. And I think he has seen the consequences of his action, which is the fact that people are calling, the National Assembly is even said to impeach him. When we spoke about this earlier, I said to you, my first reaction was, I've been wondering what exactly the president took or drank before he went into a midnight action to declare martial law. I think he didn't read the situation in the country well enough, or he has forgotten the history of Korea itself and how Korea many years ago rejected military rule or rejected, martial law that they experienced and they didn't like at the end of the day. So I think it came as a surprise to many people, and the consequences is a plan by the National Assembly to impeach him.
Yeah, that's where they're headed this week, isn't it? They're supposed to decide, vote on his political future as president towards the end of the week. But there are also reports that he has not been popular with the opposition in parliament, but in general, politically, probably tailing back to the 2022 Halloween crush that happened in South Korea. Dozens of people were killed in that. The response by the government was pretty slow. Also bad timing for him. There's also the 2024 South Korean medical crisis that happened in the country. Probably, maybe wrong timing for him in this crisis.
Look, if he's a wise politician or he has a political acumen, imposing martial law to sort out his political problems is not the best way to go, given the history of the nation. I would have thought that he would have endeavored more to reach some accommodation or to find a solution among the political parties. A number of leaders have done this. It's not the only one that has the parliament controlled by the opposition. Look, honestly, it's still very difficult for me. I think it's just out of tune with the reality, and it's a lesson to all leaders that you just don't assume you know the country well enough, and then you take some irrational action, and then you face the consequences yourself. There are ways in which police.
Yeah, just a interruption there with Ambassador Keshi's feed.
In the Minister of Defense.
Back. I do apologize. We seem to be losing connection with Ambassador Keshi at this time. We'll try to reconnect with him. So still waiting on those lawmakers in South Korea who are supposed to decide by the end of this week, at least, if President Yoon Suk-yeol remains in office as president. Ambassador Keshi, you are back. So let's talk about, why he made this announcement. The president says it's to protect South Korea from North Korea. But as we heard from the analyst in George Washington University just before we came on with this interview, you only declare national law when there is a national emergency or when there is a military need. Do you think South Korea is at that point where, such drastic measures and announcements could save the country from its really ambitious neighbor, North Korea?
No, I don't think so. I didn't get the bulk of your. I didn't get the sum total of your question. But I heard North Korea, and no, it would be wrong for him to. If you are talking in terms of whether he thinks that putting in martial law, declaring martial law and trying to run the country like it's happening in North Korea is the right thing to do. No, I think that's even worse if that's the intention he has in mind. Korea has been a democratic country for as long as many people can remember in recent times. And North Korea is completely a different dictatorship. And it will have been very difficult for him to impose such, a regime or a law, or a rule as obnoxious as that of, North Korea. So I just think that the gentleman, the president, lacked the political acumen and patience to resolve his political problems with the House and with everything he has on his table. And he thought that the easy way would be to involve the military that gives him all the power to be able to rule. By South Korea's constitution, you can only impose, from what I heard, you can only impose state of emergency, based on some serious national issues. But South Korea has really no national issue. They just have political disagreement among them. The fact that you had a president who does not control the National Assembly and who has other issues to deal with, that's not really enough for him to invite the military or to impose, martial law. And I'll go back to what I said initially. A number of leaders sometimes have, a mixed-up opinion, about they don't understand the reality of the country they are ruling. And they just go ahead and make the kind of blunder that the president of South Korea has just made.
Well, kudos to the South Korean National Assembly that quickly responded to this. Even late last night, they were still trying to meet despite opposition and restrictions from the martial law troops who were on the ground to ensure that they did not get into the National Assembly building. So the president now faces impeachment this week, although he has said he will lift the law. Don't know how soon that will happen. He says he will lift the law, and then he's hoping things return to normal. But that's an action that's a bit too late. Do you think that he could have gone about salvaging his position in a way that wasn't so contentious?
Well, he may decide to lift the law, but the truth of the matter is that the people are angry, and members of the National Assembly are even more. I think they no longer trust him, and if they've decided they want to impeach him, it shows you the measure, the length of the anger that the people feel that the president contemplates bringing in martial law, which everybody thought was past history of South Korea. So I'm not sure that will save him. But look, politicians, you never can say what will happen. They could come at the end of the day, they could make a deal. But the truth of the matter is that this is a miscalculation that caught even the people themselves that caught people by surprise, because nobody was expecting this. And as I said earlier, presidents or leaders should learn how to manage their crises, sort out their political problems without getting the military involved. Look, everybody's been trying to avoid military rule around the world. And for the president of South Korea to midnight, when you do things at midnight, it becomes suspicious. In this neck of the wood, those who go around midnight, what they try to do,
The connectivity once again. Well, we're glad we're able to have Ambassador Joe Keshi join us on the program today. There must be something in the network somewhere that's just preventing this conversation from taking place. Thanks again, Ambassador, if you can still hear us. Thanks for joining us on the program today. We'll have more stories and discussions coming up after the break on The World Today. Plus, Britain and Qatar announcing £1 billion in investment in green energy. Stay with us for details. Welcome back to The World Today. We're looking at political crisis across the world today. A quick check on what's going on in France, where French lawmakers are voting today on a no confidence motion, which are all but certain to oust the government. throwing the Eurozone's second biggest economy deeper into a lingering political crisis. Barring a last-minute surprise, the French government of Prime Minister Michel Barnier will be the first to be forced out by a no-confidence vote in more than 60 years, at a time when the country is struggling to tame a massive budget deficit. In a TV interview on Tuesday, Barnier said he still believed his government could survive the vote scheduled for the evening, that's this evening, after a debate that starts at 4 p.m. But the far-right National Rally made clear this morning that it would vote to topple Barnier alongside left-wing parties. The left and the right combined have enough votes to oust the government. President Emmanuel Macron could well ask Barnier to stay in on a caretaker role as he seeks a new prime minister, which could happen only next year. And more from Michel Barnier now. He's rejected the idea that President Emmanuel Macron should resign to unblock the country's political crisis, calling him the guarantor of stability at this moment. In a primetime TV interview ahead of today's no-confidence vote that looks set to topple his government, Barnier said he remained open to budget talks with the far-right National Rally and other parties, but warned there was a lot of tension in the country and that everyone should be wary of the heightened mood. French lawmakers will vote today on a no-confidence motion, which are all but certain to oust the fragile coalition of Michel Barnier, deepening the political crisis in the Eurozone's second-largest economy. Barring a last-minute surprise, Barnier will be the first French government to be forced out by a no-confidence vote in more than 60 years, at a time when the country is struggling to tame a massive budget deficit. Well, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is considering replacing Pete Hegseth with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as he continues to put together his cabinet. He wants to replace Hegseth as nominee to lead the Pentagon. According to reports in the United States, Hegseth's nomination has run into trouble on Capitol Hill over allegations about his personal and professional life, and Trump allies increasingly think Hegseth may not survive further scrutiny. A combat veteran and former Fox News host, Hegseth would need the support of Senate Republicans to win confirmation to the post. The Trump Transition Office and DeSantis' office did not immediately respond to requests for comments, but DeSantis, who lost his bid for the Republican presidential nomination to Trump, was on an early list of potential defense secretaries, but Trump decided to go with Hegseth. DeSantis served in the Navy's Judge Advocate General's Corps from 2004 to 2010. Back in Europe, a leader of one of Georgia's four main opposition parties was detained by police after being beaten unconscious in the capital, Tbilisi. According to his party, Georgia's Formula TV channel, a pro-opposition television network, published a video showing an unmoving Nika Gavarima being carried by the arms and legs by several police officers down a street. It said Varamia was thrown into a detention car as he was physically assaulted and unconscious. The South Caucasus country has plunged into political crisis as Georgians hold big street protests supported by opposition parties against the government's decision to suspend talks on joining the European Union. Meanwhile, Britain and Qatar have announced plans to invest £1 billion in green energy, according to Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who made the announcement in the Prime Minister's questions in Parliament earlier today. Qatar will invest the money in climate technology in the United Kingdom, with engineering company Rolls-Royce set to benefit from some of the cash to support energy transition. The announcement was made during a two-state visit to Britain by Qatar's Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, who will meet Starmer on Wednesday. Britain is set to be seeking deeper ties with a wealthy Gulf state, and Starmer hopes to use the visit to secure tangible benefits for the country on security and the economy.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome His Highness the Emir of the State of Qatar to the UK, and I look forward to discussions this afternoon on how we're strengthening our relationship and boosting trade and investment, including the announcement today of a £1 billion investment in our new clean energy partnership.
He said that the former Transport Secretary was only asked to resign after further information came to light. What was that further information?
I'm not going to disclose private conversations. Further information came to light. The Justice Secretary resigned. As I say, what a marked contrast. While she's obsessing with the...
Well, we're not quite out of Russia and Ukraine. Russia has strongly says it backs the actions of the Syrian leadership to counter an offensive by what it said were terrorist groups receiving support, including drones and training from outside the country. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova told reporters, "We strongly condemn this attack. There is no doubt that they would not have dared to commit such an audacious act without the instigation and comprehensive support of external forces that seek to provoke a new round of armed confrontation in Syria, unfurl the spiral of violence." Russia is a key ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and has provided him with military support since 2015 in the country's civil war. Zakharova said without providing evidence, rebels, including some from the former Soviet Union countries, had received drones from Ukraine and training in how to operate them. Meanwhile, displaced people who fled from Aleppo's countryside amid recent fighting have reached the town of Tabqa in northern Syria. Vans and tractors with trailers piled with bedding, belongings, and carrying people fleeing their homes could be seen along the road to Tabqa, and tents were also being set up in the town. One local official said efforts are being made to set up centers to accommodate those arriving. Just last week, rebels seized Aleppo, Syria's second largest city before the war, marking the biggest offensive for years. Let's bring in security expert Vince Onikwelu now on the show to discuss more on the situation in Syria, which has resurfaced again. We're back in the news talking about the infighting and conflicts in Syria. Vince, Syria is back on the news because of that conflict that's going on. Over the weekend, we saw rebels trying to take over the country's second largest city, and there are also attacks on other cities as well in Syria. Why do you think that this is happening now, especially with what's already going on in the Middle East?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, there are a lot of narratives, there are a lot of perspectives why this is happening now. One of those narratives could be focused on the war between Israel and Hamas, the war between Israel and Hezbollah. If you look at the structural or geographical structure of Syria, Syria has a massive geographical connection. Syria borders Israel, Syria borders Lebanon, Syria borders Iraq. But in that border between Syria and Iraq, you have to understand also the perspective of different kinds of Islam that plays out in the Middle East. Iran is obviously a Shiite Islam practicing nation, unlike Saudi Arabia, that is a Sunni practicing Islam nation. Now, the big picture is that Iraq is more obviously half Sunnis and half Shiite. So Iran needs that access route from Iran via Iraq to Syria, which happens to be a Shiite and Alawite practicer of Islam. Now take that from Syria into Lebanon, that is a Shiite practicing nation. Now there is a need to have a military supply route from Iran into Iraq, Shiite nation, and into Syria, and then into Lebanon to supply Hezbollah. If Israel is smart enough to cut off that military transfer route that connects Iran through Iraq and cut off Syria, Hezbollah will be in big trouble because they have no other source of getting military support apart from Syria. Then another perspective will be the perspective of Turkey. Turkey has an ongoing problem with the Kurds. The Kurds of Turkey are Shiite practitioners, and the Kurds have borders connecting Lebanon, connecting Turkey, connecting Syria, connecting Iraq and Iran. So there is a strong role of power who controls that area. So obviously, Syria is in a big trouble because Turkey has an interest to stop the advance of the Kurds who have connections to Syria and Iran and Iraq, whereas Israel is also interested to stop the transfer of weapons through Syria to Hezbollahs in Lebanon. So Syria has every reason to have these rebels waking up from the moon. I use the term moon carefully to start to attack, and massively, they are making massive gain. So I think it's a chessboard game. President Assad has to play smart to able to save his government. Thank you.
Yeah, and he's facing this, years after he faced an almost the same situation in Syria. I remember that when the crisis in Syria happened, first of all, it had to do with, discontent amongst the people, amongst the political class, about some of the political appointments and so on. And, they arrived at some sort of agreements with the Syrian government. But then that agreement was toppled. It seemed the Syrian government believed that there were groups being sponsored by external forces. You have identified a number of them. They're the ones who are fueling this rebel movement in Syria. And we're back again talking about this. And it does beg the question, what exactly to do with these rebels? And should President Assad consider stepping down at this time? I mean, he's been there for so long. He really hasn't got a full grip of the country. Now he's relying on Russia to provide the weapons that he needs to fight these rebels. Doesn't that reek of an already failing government?
I'm not sure that President Assad is the type of leader that is going to quit a crisis. He's a very properly oriented man. He is vastly intelligent, well experienced. His father happens to be one of his mentors, who happens to be the former president of Syria. And don't forget, Syria is one of those big ancient cities, well civilized. So I'm not sure that he's the kind of man that is going to run away from the seat of power. Because if he does that, those rebels, the Syrian National Army, that happens to be a rebel group, they are very, how will I put it in a very diplomatic way? They are very gruesome. They are very mean. They wouldn't mince to kill off the Christian population in Syria. Obviously, the HTS, another rebel group that happens to be a scale-up from Al-Qaeda, with a very experienced lead commander by the name of Gilani. Gilani obviously worked very close with the Americans back in the days. He's also been to prison in Iraq when he was captured before he was released again. So you have a very experienced war veteran. These people are very mean. If Assad decides to run away, they're going to massacre the Alawites of Syria. They are going to massacre the Christians of Syria. They are going to massacre anybody who is not a Shiite in Syria. They are very mean. And I think what Assad should rather do is to play this chessboard game with experience. Yes, he's got the backing of Iran. Yes, he's got the backing of some parts of Iraq. Yes, he's got the backing of his nation and the wealth of his nation. But the truth of the matter, he needs to understand that Israel needs him to play smart, because Israel cannot allow Syria to be used as a military weapon transfer from Iran to Hezbollah. obviously they need to play smart. And also, Assad has a strong army that can decide to hold down the rebels in the city of Hamas or in the city of Aleppo and fight with them there instead of allowing them to start going down south. And that could mean taking up the port cities in Latakia or Bananas, because you cannot allow your port cities to be taken away. So you can fight them to stop them in Aleppo, keep them constructed in Aleppo, keep them stay in Aleppo, not for them to move further south. But he has to play this chessboard very smart, because the stakeholders are various and they're all selfish stakeholders, play for their own national importance and relevance. Thank you.
Vince, thank you so much for being so comprehensive with your analysis on this issue. We'll have to delve into this once again, of course, as we watch the progression of events in Syria. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
We're off on another break on The World Today. Still ahead, Cuba's national electric system collapses after the country's largest power plant fails. Stay with us. Welcome back. Cuba's national electric system has collapsed after the country's largest power plant failed. It's the largest several such failures as the island's grid falls into disarray amid fuel shortages, natural disaster, and economic crisis. According to the country's energy and mines minister, authorities are addressing operational issues at the Matanzas power plants, with full recovery expected by tomorrow. Cuba's oil-fired power plants, already obsolete and struggling to keep the lights on, reached a full crisis this year as oil imports from Venezuela, Russia, and Mexico dwindled, contributing to multiple nationwide blackouts over 2 months. Health volunteers in Malaysia have been preparing for any surge in waterborne diseases following devastating floods that saw tens of thousands of people evacuated, with concerns in the country that days of constant rain would be on the way. Floodwaters have begun receding in the worst-hit state of Kelantan on Malaysia's northeastern coast, but government data showed more than 40,000 people remained at temporary shelters amid fears of a potential second wave of flooding this week. Authorities say nearly 5,000 cases of infectious diseases, including stomach flu and respiratory and skin infections, have been detected at Kelantan relief centers so far.
Percentage of this being infected is very much lower now compared to the previous years. A lot of understanding and knowledge has been, has been transferred, has been shared among the community, which is prone to this flood. And over the years, I think people have understand how best to live within a small confinement among among each other during floods in evacuation center, and over the years I think this experience has built the maturity and also the understanding of this community to be at their best level. We have brought in a couple more mobile clinic teams, the medical team, traveling from Kuala Lumpur and the rest of the other countries to Kelantan. So we and as mentioned, we have sort of stockpile our hygiene kits at our base camp. These are all to be distributed.
Many African mining operations, especially in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, are under intense scrutiny for human rights abuses, including the use of child labor, unsafe working conditions, and the exploitation of local communities. At the 2024 African Critical Minerals Summit, young leaders are calling for African nations to commit to advancing human rights within the sector, arguing that these violations not only damage the reputation of mining, but could also lead to sanctions and boycotts. Here's our correspondent, Innocent Samosa, in South Africa with more.
particularly in underground or remote locations, is increasingly dangerous. Young workers may be less experienced, increasing their vulnerability to accidents, exposure to toxic substance, and long-term health issues like respiratory diseases. Speaking at the 2024 African Critical Minerals Summit, Ofentse Ntsani from the South African Mining Youth Association is calling for stronger human rights commitments in the mining sector.
I think the issue of child labor is a very prevalent matter in critical mining in Africa. So the first thing I believe that the governments of those respective countries must do should reinforce the regulations regarding the mining sector, especially regarding the issue of labor and compensation. Secondly, they should speak to the private sector and have a working relationship, because some of these companies that are exploiting this legal loophole are in the private sector. So those private sector companies should come apparent and should build a relationship with the government to ensure that issues of labor, wage compensation, and regulations, the government and the private sector are on one equal footing.
Platinum engineer Khotso Matlaji shares the same sentiments.
I think African governments really need to start coming up with initiatives that help young graduates in the mining industry to actually have a word in the industry. Because in the current moment, mostly the people who hold higher positions actually have a say on the legislations and everything that happens in the country.
Women are often underrepresented in leadership roles within the mining sector. Deputy Chairperson of Women in Mining South Africa, Mukhaliadi Sabelo, says this lack of representation hinders efforts to address gender-specific issues in the industry.
Yeah, and you are really correct. I mean, the fact that women are not there means they cannot speak for themselves, and representation is quite important. I do have to say that the industry has made great strides in making sure women are coming into the industry and are in roles of influence. There's obviously still so much more that needs to be done, but we do need to recognize the progress made so far. And the truth of the matter is, until we have women represented, women issues will continue to not get addressed, and that remains a risk, as you've said.
As the demand for critical minerals continues to grow globally, the need for responsible and sustainable mining practices becomes more urgent. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Samos, Channels Television News.
Finally on the program, do you need help around the house? We all do. And say hello to Neo, your new humanoid robot. Companies including Tesla are vying to be the first to get a viable android into our daily lives. One of those hoping to win that race is 1X Technologies, a company based in Norway and Silicon Valley. They're unveiling the humanoid robot called Neo. Its CEO, Bernd Bonich, says in the long term, Neo will be doing your laundry, cleaning your house, tidying up, and generally giving you a lot of time in your life.
And I think the other spin turn as well. This is amazing. Oh my God.
All I know is Neo will have to be a lot faster than that to be working around me. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.